Well, Ane, Bonjour, Meyer Greenfield Indishnakas, Giwe Noonqued and Kipwalk First Nation, Donjiba, Giwe Noonqued and Dayong, the Gord Downey and Chani Wenjak Fun Donoki. I just introduced myself in Anishinaabe, the language from the area in which I live, and the place where some of my relatives are from, in Nipissing First Nation. What I shared is the best version I can offer at this point in my life, and for me, every word is a step forward and a way of honoring who I am and where I'm from. I've been practicing how to say my name and where I am from for over a decade, and it took me more than 5 years to feel comfortable enough to speak these words out loud and in front of others. And here's what I shared. Hello, welcome. My name is Meyer Greenfield, and I'm from North Bay and Kipwalk First Nation. I live in North Bay, and I work with the Gord Downey and Chani Wenjak Fund. In First Nations ways, it's very important to say who you are and where you're from. This is not only so others know who you are and where you're from, it's also a way to remind yourself of the journey that you've taken and how far you've come, who you are and where you're from. I believe this is the most authentic way to introduce yourself. And for me, these words are more beautiful when they're spoken in Anishinaabe. Indigenous languages are deeply descriptive. Words carry the fullness of what we are speaking about. So for example, when I say bonjour or welcome, it means so much more than just a greeting. It extends to all of you here today, and also to the ancestors who are guiding me and all of us as I share these words with you. Indigenous ways are centered on being and living as whole, complete human beings. This means living in balance, not only just with ourselves, but also with the land, the waters, the animals, the plants, and one another. It is a way of life that reminds us that harmony is found in honoring our relations. So before I go further, I wanted to share that throughout this talk, you'll hear me mention some of my most favorite people. You'll be hearing stories about my family, my coworkers, my friends, my mentors, and my elders. The people who have guided me to where I am today. Education hasn't always been kind to Indigenous people in this country. Trust in Western school systems is still fragile for many of our nations and communities. And standing here today in this building, I can feel my ancestors present. I can also feel the weight of history. I read that in 1837, the Toronto Club opened as a gathering place for those who considered themselves to be visionaries of that time. Conversations inside these walls shaped railways, newspapers, and the cities beyond. For Indigenous people, these decisions and the patterns of decision-making behind them tore apart our nations and our families. This was a time when languages, our lands, our ceremonies, our food sources, and our children were taken away against our will. This was a building where decisions were made to take away our choices. And at different points in Canada's history, this was considered legal. And while we talk about choices being taken away, I must also remember that for many years, decisions were made that denied women and others seen as less than the right to even enter this space. A few weeks ago, I was speaking with my friend and our friends, Lori, about some of this history. And she shared an idea that I want to bring to life today. So to begin, I'd like to invite all of the women in this room to please stand. Look around at one another and take in the strength and wisdom in this room. Miigwech, please stay standing. Now I would like to invite all those who at some point in history would have been denied entry into this building because of their gender, their culture, their heritage, their identity, to please rise. Please look around and see each other. Recognize the resilience that has brought us all here and the wisdom that lives in each and every one of you. Please sit down. Miigwech. My family is of mixed heritage. My mom is Irish and French. My stepfather, who I call Dad, who raised me alongside my mom and two sisters since I was just 1 year old, is English and German. My birth father, who I still call Dad, is First Nations and Italian. And through him, I have a brother and a sister. I have one daughter, Emmy, my rock, and that was my phone going off, and I apologize. Normally I turn it off, but she has an emergency bypass, so that's what that noise was over there. I apologize. Without her, I would be on a very different path today. She grounds me, she guides me, and she reminds me that the work that I do in education isn't just for today's youth. It is for generations yet to come, and perhaps one day, my grandchildren. My upbringing and my heritage have shaped me to walk naturally into two worlds, Western and First Nations. In this space, I am constantly balancing, translating, and bridging perspectives, finding the connections that make both worlds stronger. My mother was an activist in women's rights, and I grew up in the 1980s and 90s being active alongside her and her friends and my aunties. My father was an educator with a massive love for music. I grew up listening to all types of music, falling asleep, listening to him, my mom, their friends, my aunts, singing in what they called the key of Zed. They called it the key of Zed because sometimes they didn't sound that great. I stand here not as an expert with all the answers, but as a student with many questions, always learning and doing my best to listen. I stand here as a messenger for the many people who have touched my life along the way. As I was preparing for this talk, I shared that I prefer listening over speaking with many of my favorite people. And last week, my friend Michael gently reminded me of something. And he said, "You know what, Meyer? You're a knowledge helper." And I loved the sound of that. And it helped me to make speaking about the future of education and Indigenous education a little bit more comfortable. Because it reminded me that my role isn't to impress, but it's to share and to support. My path through education has also been shaped by two worlds. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a place where choice was possible for me. It was in college that I first learned about residential schools, and I had never heard those words before. And I was 23 years old. I remember sitting beside my friend Jack in class, and our teacher Carmen stood at the podium, and she said, "Today we're going to be learning about residential schools. If I hear one rude comment, snickering, or anything disrespectful from any of you, you will all receive a 0 in this course." And then she told us what happened. And I remember feeling dizzy and nauseous, and I turned to Jack, who was quite knowledgeable, which was part of the reason why I sat beside him. He was also very funny. And I asked him if he knew about residential schools. And he said yes. And I was shocked. And I said, "Who chooses to do this to people? And on purpose?" And I'll never forget the look in his eyes and how sad they were. He was sad that I didn't know, because he knew that I was First Nations. And in the way many of us do, he turned to soften this with some humor. And he said, "I don't know, Meyer, can you just be quiet? I don't want to get a 0, just be quiet." So this was my first pivotal moment, when I started to begin to learn the true history of Canada. Another moment was when I received my status. I was 29 years old. My mom said to me, "Now you must give back to your community." At first, I wasn't exactly sure what she meant by that, because as many of my friends know, I can be quite literal. And I remember thinking, how am I supposed to do that? I need to stay in North Bay. My community is 45 minutes away, across the border in Quebec. This was before the internet is anywhere where it was right now. So in my mind, the best solution was to become a lawyer. So I completed my honors BA, and I wrote my LSAT. But my creative and literal mind didn't work well with this type of testing, and I failed miserably. Instead, I went into justice, working with youth in secure custody. But my learning beyond Western education, what I consider to be my deepest learning, has come through First Nations ways of knowing and doing. I thrive when I'm guided by others. Elders, knowledge keepers, family, colleagues, friends, artists, youth, communities, and the plants, the animals, the land, the water, and the sky. Because in these ways, learning happens in circles. I remember one circle where language keepers Tori and Blair were teaching youth to introduce themselves in Anishinaabe-Moan. I was the organizer, but I was also the student. And so were Tori and Blair and everyone else in that room. We were all singing, we were drumming, There was elders, teachers, youth, friends, coworkers, all sitting side by side. And with us always were our ancestors, guiding us and showing us the importance of living alongside the 7 grandfather teachings. Bravery, respect, wisdom, truth, humility, honesty, and love. I've worked across many fields: food, justice, national not-for-profits, post-secondary education, technology, consulting, food sovereignty, the arts, and national education. I've also volunteered my time sitting on boards and committees and contributing to community projects through graphic design and community development. Along the way, I've run community and national programs, built digital libraries to bring resources into communities with little to no internet. And I rhyme all this off not to say that I'm great at all these things I do, but to share something that I noticed as a thread. Learning cannot happen in isolation. It needs the right systems around it. You need economy, you need healthcare, you need culture, you need homes, you need food and technology, art, water, energy, language, community, the list goes on. And what we need is sovereignty. Another pivotal moment for me came during the final Tragically Hip concert in the summer of 2016. I was standing beside my friend Tyler when Gord Downie paused to speak directly to Prime Minister Trudeau about what is happening in First Nations communities. I turned to Tyler and I said, "Did he just say what I think he said?" Tyler said, "I think he did." And I remember that moment, and I remember thinking, this is it. Gord Downie is going to take lead and leadership in reconciliation. And how cool is that? He's an artist, he's a poet, he's a musician, and it made complete sense to me. And I knew right there and then that I wanted to be part of it. Fast forward to today, I feel both proud and fortunate to carry on Gord Downie's call to do something, and to be able to do meaningful work alongside Indigenous communities throughout this country. For me, education just isn't about classrooms and books. It is holistic, spelled with a W. It is entire. It is about people, the elders who have shared their wisdom and time with me, the youth who have taught me humility and laughter, the artists who show me new ways of seeing and listening, my families, friends, and coworkers who have challenged me and held me accountable. In justice work, I saw Indigenous youth misunderstood and treated unfairly, taken so far from home that their families couldn't even visit them. And this is still happening. This is where my future talk takes a different turn from Ben's and Dr. Sarah's. They both spoke about systems that are changing for the better in India and in women's health, here in Canada and beyond. In India, youth and families are finding more opportunities to stay. They don't need to leave their homes to find a better life. In women's health, voices are finally being heard, and women are gaining access to the care that truly meets our needs. But for Indigenous people, especially those living in remote communities throughout this country, these systems are shifting at a much slower pace. When I attended college and university, I didn't know what was available to me as a First Nations learner. I was too shy to ask for support, and I know that I missed out on some wonderful opportunities. I've had the privilege of working in Indigenous offices at the same local college and university where I graduated from. I've witnessed the growth of support systems and reconciliation initiatives today, and I'm able to continue this great work as a career. The reconciliation efforts happening throughout this country, I believe, are something to be very proud of. But the realities for Indigenous communities are very different here in Canada. Today, Indigenous people often are forced to leave their homes to pursue economic opportunities, to give birth, to attend healthcare appointments, to access education, and more. And far too often, young people must leave home just to attend secondary school. I've been speaking about choice, and it was Harriet Visitor who reminded me of this, that for many First Nations communities, there have been little choice. She told me about having to leave home at age 14 to attend secondary school in Thunder Bay. This is still happening in 2025. This isn't shifting. Many youth in my community travel 45 minutes to and 45 minutes home from school every day because there isn't a secondary school in my First Nation. Approximately 54% of First Nation students leave their home communities to attend secondary school. A figure driven by the fact that less than half of on-reserve First Nations communities offer high school programming. This is widespread need to leave community for education underscores significant challenges in providing equitable access to secondary education for First Nations youth in Canada. This is from the College and Institutes Canada in 2024. This isn't shifting. In the film The Secret Path, Pearl Wenjack shared her hope to see a school on her First Nation and communities throughout Canada. This was nearly a decade ago, and her words continue to help me in my work today. The future of Indigenous education is Indigenous-led. It is present in every nation and community throughout this country. It is rooted in language, in land, in circles, and in lived experience. It is holistic, nurturing body, mind, and spirit. The 7 grandfather teachings help to guide us into this future. The Western systems that I've been speaking about are very hard to shift. These are also known as wicked problems. We need generational solutions, not 3 to 5 year funding. As my colleague Bobby likes to say, we need genuine solutions. Learning happens with everyone around us. Education is relational, not solitary. This building has witnessed nearly 2 centuries of change. Yet here we stand, shaping a new future. Generations before us have shaped their future here, but now it's our turn. When we live through the 7 grandfather teachings, we create classrooms that are places of belonging, communities where education heals instead of harms, futures where every young person, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, can walk proudly in who they are. So I leave you with this. Education is more than memorizing. It is our own personal journey, how we live, how we care for one another, the choices we make, and the lessons we share along the way. Seek out people you admire and inspire you, and get them to help guide you. I sat with my elder, John Sawyer, to write this talk, and I offer you this closing from him. Be in tune with how you listen and who truly is your teacher. Miigwech.